How's it going, guys? This is Trey Bell. I'm with Johnathan Cridford, and this is Arcane Frequencies. How you doing, Jonathan?
Very well, thank you, Trey. It's good to be back for part three. It's been a while. I've moved house since then, as you can see, new background. Not quite as interesting as the last one at the moment. A lot of stuff still in boxes, but we're getting there. And yeah, it's I have heating here. I didn't have heating in my last house, so
Oh, dang.
yeah. So
Wait, why?
well, it was a listed building, which basically means that there's only a certain amount that you can do with them in terms of what you can install. This house is a little bit more modern, so my partner and I, when we bought this place, it's got a brand new sort of central heating and all of that kind of thing, which is just amazing for me because I've not known such luxury before. So yeah. But no, I'm
I'm
looking
happy
forward
for
to.
you.
Thank you, man. I'm looking forward to this, and looking forward to getting back to Current 93 and discussing the kind of the albums that we've kind of been holding back since the last two episodes. And I think particularly the reception to those two videos has been really great. So I'm hoping that the people who've watched those will watch this and get something out of it. Trey and I have been um, talking about ideas for future content as well. So yeah, hoping to kind of keep this going, if not on Current 93, but on sort of similar sort of avenues.
Yeah, possibly. I know how you mentioned like doing a book review of England's Hidden in Reverse, which I actually it's funny that you said that because I have thought about before I even had like got the books from Amazon. I'm like, it would be cool if I like did like some type of you know audiobook reading of this because no one's doing that.
No,
Like
that's
who would
quite
take
cool.
the time to actually do like an audiobook for like these very obscure bands and just concepts and you know moments in history. I'm like,
It's
I
a really
feel
cool
like
idea.
especially and I'm like, I feel like I may do that, but I do think like reviewing the book would be a good idea because
Yeah,
I
I can't. I did look to see when we sort of talked about doing that. I did look to see if there were any video reviews out there, and there aren't. So I think there's definitely a space for that.
yeah, we're gonna probably have to be like later in the future because I still got to get past probably like the 60th page because
Yeah,
I'm right now I'm like on the coil part
right.
and and honestly I was kind of because like in my head I was thinking like if some other videos we could do is like as like I'm reading the book maybe we could probably like review some coil
That'd be
in
great.
the process because like I
Yeah.
was thinking either coil or nature and organization or something in the same vein but I think if you're like I'm we definitely should do a review of England's Hidden in Reverse. But in the meantime, like as I'm like going through like some of like the pages, like yeah, maybe since I know you like Coil a lot, and I actually did listen to a few Coil albums like from the beginning, like the first three albums, and I was like, okay, I'm liking what I'm hearing. I'm liking what I'm hearing, especially the association with Genesis P-Orirdge and like the Comes Transmission era. I was like, okay, so it kind of all collectively brings everything together, knowing how like a lot of those bands like were connected in like the earlier days. Like I've said in most of my other videos, but now I feel like now that I have this book, I can get more in depth because I've been known about the book years even before I actually even like bought the book. So I'm like, all right, like I gotta make sure I can get this book at some point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually, the doing some coil reviews while we're both kind of because I need to reread England's Hidden Reverse. It's been a while since I read it fully, so I'm kind of in the process of doing that at the moment. And doing some coil reviews in the meantime would be great because I've kind of circled back around to coil in recent months. The first sort of handful of albums of theirs, including I suppose Horse Rotivator is the big one from that early period. I've liked those albums for a really long time, and probably since I was maybe not as a teenager, but certainly in my early 20s. I had a friend, I think I've mentioned this before. I had a friend at university who kind of introduced me to those, and Current 93 as well. And I think as with the likes of new independent labels like Days Records, for example, putting out compilations and things like that in recent years, I think is it's a really good time to kind of be getting into coil again. So yeah, I'm definitely down for that.
It was funny. I remember I was talking to a friend who I just kind of knew through the music scene. He like showed up at my job, and like we just got anytime like I'm with someone who just is into music the same way that I'm into music. Like we just go on a banter of just like all these different bands, hip hop, rock,
Yeah,
industrial. And he actually, it was funny because like I think I had mentioned like Genesis P-Orirdge, and then he was like, "Oh, is that doesn't he have like an album cover with like it's like a man behind like it's like a white album cover. The dude's like red," and I was like, "I think you're thinking of Coil." It's like, "Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, Coil." And it was like a
yeah.
man of Aples or something like that.
That's it. Yeah,
Apes of Naples. Like,
Apes of
yeah,
Naples. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a good time to be getting into Coil. There's been quite a recent exhibition of John Balance's art down in Brighton here in the UK, and not in Brighton, sorry, in London. And like I said, Days Records have been re-releasing some of their albums. Music to Play in the Dark 1 and 2 have been re-released fairly recently through Days, and they're a really interesting label as a little aside, just because they champion a lot of new artists coming through, bands like Drab Majesty, for example. But they do also have a knack for re-releasing interesting stuff from the early 80s that's kind of more on the left field side of post-punk. And Coil's one of those. So yeah, I'd be really up for doing some Coil, definitely.
right, you guys here. Next review is gonna be Coil. Can't wait for it. It's like
Yeah.
now it's time for me to. I think at this point in my life, like I can solidify that I've gotten through as much current 93 as I can and have fully digested them.
Yeah.
Took 8 years. Thank you, Johnathan, because like I think you actually helped me break that threshold that I've been trying to
Cool.
break through because like I this is probably the most I've listened to current 93 consecutively for months ever in my whole entire life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm getting really familiar with like the lyrics, the different instrumentations. And I think musically, like, that's kind of new for me because like since I grew up mainly listening to hip hop, like I'm always like more focused on like the lyrics to a
Yeah.
degree. And like I mean the beats and instrumentations do play a big part of it, but depending on what you're listening to, you can take them or leave them. Whereas like with me, is like with this band, um, you know, I had to actually attune of like, all right, like I like if I can't fully focus on what the lyrics are saying, if I don't understand them, at least like I'm focusing on like the acoustic guitars and instrumentations.
Yeah.
And the more I've been doing that over the years, I'm like, I feel like I'm starting to have a better understanding or a knack for like how to play string instruments and just how things are orchestrated instrumentally. Because like that was
Sure.
something I feel like I've always lacked in when it came to like my music knowledge and like trying to understand how to like use those terms to express like what I feel about I back in the day, I'll probably say like, yeah, that's a cool guitar sound. Whereas
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, like how he strums like the guitar to like make that consistent riff, and then a chime pops in, and I can still probably get better at it. But yeah, thank you, man. Like this
No, no
is
problem. Thank you for it's been really fun to kind of go through the records in this level of depth, because I think they require and deserve that, because it's not easy listening, and I think it's very easy to miss things, but it's also very easy to kind of um these are albums, and this is music generally that you do have to kind of give a lot of time to, and kind of sit down and concentrate on it. It's not really um music for just having on while you're doing something else. and that has its place too. You know, I'm not knocking that at all. But I think that, yeah, records like these, um, you need to give a lot of time to. So it's been much the same for me actually. Doing these videos has really um kind of it made me go back and listen to everything with different ears, I would say.
Yeah, same, especially because like I've had so many different eras, and um this be my last statement and we can go into Thunder Perfect Mind. But I do
Yeah,
feel like, again, like it feels relieving because over the years I knew eventually I wanted to do something like this. I didn't think of it as like a YouTube channel, but
sure.
I did know that like I need to find someone who's on the same level with this band as I am, because like there's something special here. And the fact that they've been around for this long and don't have like this, even like when it comes to underground music, I feel like they're more underground than underground, or like whatever. I mean, I don't even know what you would call it. I feel like there's the aspect that like they've been around for so long, they've kind of always been somewhat obscure.
Yeah,
They're definitely probably high up there in like their own niche, like
it's
in, you know.
it's really interesting because while I agree with you, they are definitely the underground of the underground. At the same time, they can play a venue like the Union Chapel in London and sell it out 2 year, a year in advance,
Yeah,
which is quite a prestigious venue here in the UK. And there are bands who probably many would consider to be at the level above them who can't do that. So it's almost as if their audience is very, very small, but very good. Just they're in it for life. And certainly, reading the comments on our videos and watching anything Current 93 related, the video of the exhibition that we talked about last time had some audience members on there. And, you know, this is really, it's not just a couple of records that they have in their collection. Current 93 and David are actually a huge part of their life. And I think that is why they've sustained, and that's why they continue to be able to do things like play the Union Chapel and be able to put these events on that most bands of their level can't.
yeah. I feel like I kind of tune like David as somewhat of like a mystical preacher to a degree,
Yeah,
especially like knowing, especially with the religious undertones that he has in a lot of his music. You know, I, especially growing up in the church, I kind of had to like readjust like my mindset about like, how, you have contemporary music, big venues, the big artists,
yeah,
selling out arenas, but then I also have to think about like church music, in the sense that like people are highly dedicated to church music because it's their life. And I feel, and like if I go to a church or like a mega church, there still is a lot of people. Like
yeah,
people love this type of music, but it's not projected in like the mainstream in that type of way. But if anything, the gravity or like the intensity is probably much more stronger because there's much more of an intense dedication to it outside of just the music, because
yeah,
you're having all these different people from different walks of life with different concepts of philosophy, psychology, and just different understanding of the arts. I would say I feel like this is if anything, the music is just another aspect to it. And I feel like that definitely goes hand in hand with like how Genesis P-Orirdge, kind of started the whole mentality of this I guess what people will call a culture, or just the neo folk underground, or whatever he was like starting, kind of coming out of like the comb transmission era,
yeah,
and like present, like, from comb transmission to throbbing bristles to psychic TV, and knowing that David was part of psychic TV along with other people of psychic TV being part of Current 93. Like it's like all these I would say it's like all these different chapels like coming together at different points in time, but most fans are going to cross over,
sure.
but like it's all like one big family and counting, especially now that they're getting they were reaching the people our age
Yeah.
who are
Yeah.
into like, these subject matters.
No, it's interesting. That's a really interesting way of putting it, actually. I'd not really thought about it in that way before. Um, but yes, it fascinates me that um a band like Current 93 and an artist like David can still do these things. And I think actually reading England's Hidden Reverse, it really does help. Again, um, plugging the book here, but if anybody out there watching this hasn't read that, it's probably the best way to try and make sense of who was in what group at what time, and because it really does map it out quite well. And reading that, there's a striking sense of they were on their own. There were people listening to this music, and there were audience members there who were appreciative and loved what they were doing, but they were really on their own. And like you said, the underground to the underground, the press was muted at best, and yeah, fascinating, really.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I love it. That's why I'm like something I feel like I can keep with myself for life
Yeah,
without
sure,
feeling like it's a phase.
sure,
Even though I'm pretty dedicated to music as a whole, because I listen to all different types of genres, like
same,
this
yeah,
band and bands like them are very special to me because it's been 8 years and I feel like I have not at once lost any appreciation or interest in this band. If anything, I feel like I get more curious the more I know,
sure,
and I'm
sure,
just like want to continue it and just be able to, you know, again like dive into like other bands like them, which I have
yeah,
already at this point. But now that like I'm past the whole like, oh, I'm listening to it because it's weird. Like if anything, like with what's going on in the world right now, this music actually sounds very normal to me
it
now
does,
because like
yeah,
it's reflecting exactly what I feel like people go through when it comes to the human experience. And I've been thinking about like, for this video, how I'm like trying to readjust like the things I've already said in previous videos and kind of just like beef them up or update them. And I guess now I'll just go into Thunder Perfect Mind.
yeah. Let's do it.
I want to start off with like my audience. Whoever watched my Thunder Perfect Mind video back in the day, like it was literally the third video on this channel. I'm sorry, I got the terms wrong. I Yes, agnosticism is different from Gnosticism, and I'm because people in the comments section had called me out on that, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right. So I apologize for that. I was very new. I knew I probably was gonna get a lot of shit wrong because like I still was hell immature about like going about this band, but I'm like I needed to start somewhere, so I was just kind of just going with whatever I like had in my like mental vocabulary at the time. And it was just like riffing, pretty much just riffing. I'm like, all
Yeah,
right, let's just take a stab at it. But we're gonna get started with talking about Thunder Perfect Mind. Like I said, I already did a review for this, but I feel like I kind of want to re-review this album because I've listened to this project at least maybe 5 times since our last video, and I feel like I have a better understanding of it now.
yeah,
And I kind of got some notes. And honestly, like you can chime in whenever you feel like it,
yeah. Of
because
course.
I kind of want this to just be like, I don't want to go too in depth like my reviews, but um, from listening to Thunder Perfect Mind for the past 4 years, because I think I actually listened to it for the first time in 2019 before COVID. Like once I moved to Georgia, I remember like at that time I was like, all right, I need to go more in depth in Current 93. And
Yeah,
I remember it was in which eventually led me to like wanting to make this YouTube channel because I was like, all right, like I need to get to the next level, like stop listening to them every blue moon and just like stick with them at least consistently enough. And so we got the first song, A Beginning, and it's pretty much a just kind of a intro song. It's not really long at all, but it is striking of how like it starts off with saying, going into a forest expecting flowers, but realizing the flowers were not able to grow. Well, the flowers canoed me no roses, which pretty much I interpret as like they're looking for something like a
Yeah,
flower in a forest, but the expectation is not there. So
sure.
I noted that as like a sense of disappointment. And so I kind of based that off of like, all right, so I've listened to this album multiple times. I never really took that in. So this album's dealing with the concept of like, expecting something beautiful and, realizing, oh, what I was expecting is not fully there.
Yeah.
And I was like, how is this an interesting tone setter for the rest of the album? Then we go into the descent of Long Satan in Babylon. And this is likely a reference to Robert Frost's poem Fire and Ice, first
Yes.
published in 1920 through Harper's Magazine. The poem discusses the end of the world, comparing ice to hate and fire to passion and desire. Although it was not very clear who Long Satan and Babylon are since the release of David Tibet's books, Sing Omega, published in 2014, it was revealed that they were supposed to be two trustful lieutenants of Satan in a novel about their descent to Earth, to where the world leads to open a lock to all the possibilities inherent in time and space. And the two evil figures are greedy, driven away from the inner world by worldly desires. Um, yeah, I guess that's what that one meant because, like, hey, you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, we we mentioned this before we started recording that Thunder Perfect Mind feels like a very, very personal record for David. And I think this feels like one of the earliest occasions where he's not when he's exploring religious themes without it being in a purging sense, which we talked about last time with some of the earlier works. Um, there's more of an exploratory uh, element at play here, as you've mentioned, going through those. And I think there's a real rather than it being a purging, it feels to me like it's a soul bearing in a way. You know,
I like that word.
there's an ode to his father in there. Um, and obviously there was Hitler as Kalki. Um, and again, that sets alarm bells ringing for people. And David is nothing if not a provocateur. But, again, digging a little bit deeper, Kalki was the 10th and final incarnation of Vishnu, who was, you know, set to destroy the cosmos on a white horse, if I remember my religious studies at school, and kind of end the world cycle, if I remember correctly. And there were people out, there are ideas um, out there, kind of texts out there with many people believing that Hitler was the reincarnation of Kalki. And, when you kind of pair that with the fact that he's saying about not Gnostic and agnostic before, when you pair that with the fact that the Thunder Perfect Mind, the title, comes from a Gnostic poem, um, and the kind of the emphasis that divine exists both inside and outside of oneself. It's it's him kind of reaching out for a lot of different strands of not even necessarily religion, but different strands of the divine, um, without it being a purging. It's kind of like he's kind of gone past the point of that and is actually just starting to become, I hate to use the term a tourist, but um, seeing what's out there.
Yeah, I actually like how, yeah, that's a good description of it. And I like how you said divine because, like, I do feel like I reuse certain words just because, like, they're comfortable. But
Yeah,
I do like, because sometimes I'm like, is it always religious or am I just saying that because, like, it's what I'm used to and like how to describe like mystical stuff. But yeah, I do feel like yeah, the 90s era does feel like there is something more divine about it, whereas like the earlier era was like again we said, the purging, dealing with like religious subject matters as like tools or outlets where I feel like David is starting to venture into a more looser form of expression when it comes to the music.
I agree.
And
Because I think those early records too, there's a sense of him railing against his childhood on those, um, which is understandable given the stories that he's told about that. And there's less of that here. And I think whereas those early records, like I said, the divine and the religious imagery is no less here than it is on those. A casual listener could get something out of a record like this, I believe, that they couldn't get out of something like Nature Unveiled or Dog's Blood Rising or even Imperium, actually. Um, and it's interesting, actually, that this is one of the earliest occasions where he starts reaching out in terms of collaboration too, because you mentioned the first track at beginning. You've got Shirley Collins on there, who has appeared on several other current '93 albums. And
yeah,
if I'd been more prepared, I'd have written down which one she's actually appeared on. But she.
I feel like sorry. I feel like she definitely may have been on Swastikas for Naughty.
I think
Maybe.
I think she was, and I think she was a legendary folk singer in the '60s. Her and her sister Dolly, in the early '70s, and she worked with Ashley Hutchings in from Fairport Convention. They put together a band called Steel Eye Span in the '70s and had quite significant success, particularly here in the UK in the '70s. And it's interesting because David has mentioned several times in interviews that he was a fan of the likes of the Incredible String Band, who did explore similar topics to David, albeit in a different way. And Dolly and Shirley would play with Robin Williamson from the Incredible String Band as well. So there are these interesting little connections here, and it feels like David, like I say, in the early '90s and many of these records from that time, he was becoming more of a tourist in a musical sense and in a lyrical sense too, in terms of the subject matter. And he felt freer to me. And it's interesting that you mentioned the flow of the music in this one. You can really hear that, and I completely agree.
Yeah,
He felt freer.
exactly. Because like a lot of because in the reason why I didn't really talk about too many songs. I think I only talked about 3 songs when I did the review for Thunder Perfect Mind. And now that like I've listened to this album much more, like outside of my favorites, like I have more in-depth understanding of some of the or at least like appreciation for
Sure.
other songs that I didn't really mention. So for example, um uh we can probably skip a song for Douglas after he's dead because like we've already gone in depth about that.
Yeah.
But for hold up, is it? I want to say it's All the Stars Are Dead Now. Hold on, I need to. Oh yeah. So one of the songs that I actually really did like on this project that I didn't talk about on the my original Thunder Perfect Mind
Yeah.
review was All the Stars Are Dead Now. It's like 9 minutes long, and it's like the one part of the album where it kind of starts to slightly go back to like those old school like
Yes.
creepier elements. I wouldn't say total industrial stuff, but definitely some like that what was that type of moment type of deal. And I'm like,
I agree,
okay,
actually.
I
I
like this.
agree.
I like this.
There's a little bit of that as well on Hitler as Kalki, although it's almost more in a rock
It's
sense. There's wah wah
exactly,
all over the place there, and
and
that
it's
was
fun. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say that was really cool to hear. And actually, um, if you think about where it is in the discography, that was the last thing I expected to hear. Um,
And it's funny that you mentioned Hitler's Kalki because like it literally went out during the last month before we did this video. I was re-listening to this song, and I always was thinking that like those female vocals in the back, or at least like the
yeah,
harmonized vocals. I was always trying to figure out what are they saying. So they're saying Jesus I thought they were saying Jesus spills his blood,
Yeah,
but then I realized I looked at the lyrics. I was like, oh wait, no, they're saying Jesus kills Hitler,
right. That's
and I was
interesting.
just like, oh, what?
That's
And I don't
interesting.
know, it just blew my mind. I was just
Yeah,
like, because like for years I was always thinking they said Jesus spills his blood, and I was like, and so I like now the album makes has like certain continuity that it didn't have for me at the beginning, and like when I first started listening to it, especially with Hitler is Calculi being, I guess, somewhat like the outro song. I know there's
yeah,
two other songs before that, but like kind of the grand finale. And I'm like, all right, so there's a theme. There is a theme, because at first I had described this album as like, a compilation of like different ideas and thoughts and stuff like that, and kind of is with like the second disc if you got the deluxe version.
yeah,
Like, I think the album made much more sense to me just knowing that detail of like, when they're talking about like Hitler, or even like the song for Douglas after he's dead. There's like some we not saying it's an intense continuity, but it the album had more structure to it than like I had initially realized. And I'm like, all right, there are things that are connected. And even on this song, it's funny because he even has a lyric on here that calls back to swastikas for naughty,
yeah.
where he's saying like there are four corners in the world, he said. And I was like, okay, so this is definitely coming off of like the swastikas for naughty era, or at least is heavily influenced like from like what that album was doing.
I feel like as well, this is also the apotheosis, if you like, or the kind of the zenith of the regular collaborators all coming together from different eras of current 93, because obviously David's on here, Stephen Stapleton is on here, who, as we said kind of in the first episode of this, is the closest thing to another sort of official member of the band, if you like, who's been there from day one. Douglas P is obviously on here. Michael Cashmore's on here on guitar, and I always forget he's on this record actually. John Balance is on here from Coil. Rose McDowell, who did backing vocals for a lot of these albums, is here. Um, yeah, Shirley Collins, as I mentioned before, and so that's a lot of people who would appear at different eras of the group all in one. And I think the interesting ones for me are David Kenny on guitar, who does all the kind of screaming feedback at the end of Hitler as Kalki, who I don't think appeared again on a current 93 record. And someone correct me if that's wrong. Um, but I think he was a really interesting addition, and it's a shame that that wasn't explored further, because that track really is like a sort of 60s acid rock rave up by the end of it, you know.
Yeah, it's just
It
like
really feels
the
like something that Sid Barrett would have done, you know, with
I, it's funny because I like when I get to Hitler's Kalki, I'm just like, man, this is so like it's monumental. It has like that hardcore rock aesthetic with like a tinge of industrial, but like I
yeah,
can't describe it, but it's like that distorted like guitar. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure like if that is a distorted guitar, or like
yes
how
it is.
like they're making it sound. Yeah, so it's just like, and I the thing is like I even hear this type of like a big like colossalness like vibe from like a distorted guitar where they're making songs like this on other albums,
Uh,
like because there's one on Horsey and also one on The Light Is Leaving Us All, and sometimes I'm like, all these particular songs sound all similar. They're all like kind of around the 9 minute mark. They're long, but like it's just like this like
yeah,
grittiness that like you don't usually hear from current 93 in this type of way.
it's
But it's like they
interesting.
took the older sound of the industrial dark ambient and kind of made it more, I guess, palatable.
Yeah.
But it's just like
And
I just like the infusion of more like rock
yeah,
aesthetics.
and it works, you know, and I think the only way I'd really love to learn a bit more about how some of these records were made. Obviously, the early ones, because they were so heavily kind of improvisational in a way. But the only way I can think, as a guitar player myself, the only way I can think that some of those sounds were achieved were by actually stacking distortion and overdrive effects on top of one another, which I do a bit of when I'm kind of messing around. I have a few over there, because I think somebody who maybe doesn't play the electric guitar um, might not know is that when you all all pedals, effects pedals, whether it be a distortion or a kind of an echo box or something like that, they all have their own sound. And you can take three things that are all labeled distortion, for example, and they'll all sound completely different and do different things. And so you will sometimes find yourself, and I've definitely done this. You find yourself going, well, I really like how kind of I like how smooth the sound is of this one, but I really like the feedback that this one gives me. And so what you would kind of end up putting the two together, tweaking the settings, and just trying to find that sweet spot where you get the tone of this, you get the perfect amount of tone from both rolled into one. And that's how I think they would have done those sounds on there. Because it's so big, it doesn't sound like it could be one sound. Or it may
Yeah,
be that they recorded several different sounds all playing the same thing. Um,
it's I was gonna say it's funny you say that because like when it comes to like when I make music, 'cause obviously I don't play any instruments. Sadly, I need to learn. But when I'm using GarageBand and I've made like well, actually, I did play a guitar very, very horribly in like my microphone and recorded it on GarageBand and like a song that I'm actually making now because like most of my music has been heavily influenced just like combining hip hop with neo folk and I'm like, all right, I want authentic acoustics. So like my friend let me borrow his guitar and like I just like play some stuff, chopped it up a bit, like got a good sample guitar loop. And that's kind of the same thing that I did to like kind of get that Hitler as Kalki type of sound with the distorted guitar. I kind of just like layered them on top of each other and I was just like, all right, yeah, that's perfect. That's the sound that I'm trying to go for because like yeah, Hitler like over the years Hitler as Kalki has like really influenced a lot of like how I approach trying to make neo folk music with the fusion of hip hop and other
sure.
experimental like endeavors. And so probably that's what they were doing. Cause
Yeah.
like sometimes I'm like when I'm making my music, I'm like, yeah, I don't think anyone would probably know how I did any of this if like I didn't tell them. Like, because like right for me, I'm like kind of experimenting myself and like seeing what works.
Mm.
Because honestly, that's probably how they did it. Like they probably just tweaked and messed around with stuff and like the things that they liked, they just continued on and just
Yeah.
added on over the years and depending on like whatever technology was available to them at that time like they just probably just combined all of it so I kind of have to think about it like in that sense where it's like you know in the future people probably gonna wonder how we made music because
Yeah.
everything might just be so digital and they're like how wait they had an app called GarageBand and they just like did all these different distortions and stuff like that and
Sure.
like how like that seems impossible I can just think it like people probably be able to think distortion, make
Yeah.
distortion. So like that's the best way I can think of how they they just kind of just experimented and just like kept with the things that they liked in like their earlier music. They just kept it, left out the stuff they didn't like, and just build upon that. And that's my only theory.
No, I would agree. I would agree. Um, so we're going to talk about Horsey next, and
Yes,
I'm going to let you lead on this because I know this is a really special record for you. But
Horsey.
before we get into it, I'm just going to say that I think this is maybe, there we go. I'm going to
Yeah,
say I think this
Horsey.
is maybe the most underrated, overlooked current 93 release
I
because
agree.
it's
Like even
brilliant.
yeah, because even upon discovering like current 93 are like starting to go more in depth on them. There's some albums, like even if I haven't, if I'm trying to catch up with the band's discography, I can tell what albums are probably more disregarded than like others, even if I have no idea, like, what the popular album is. And I could tell, like, even just looking at the album cover, I'm like, I can see how like this kind of probably fly, under people's radars, because it's just so, it's obviously like a kid-like drawing of like a horse. Loki kind of looks very demented, but like the authenticness of like the childlike nature of it makes
Yeah,
it just captivating.
it is.
And
It is.
so here's the thing about Horsey. It's technically only 7 songs, but because there's like long run times on a few of the songs, like it kind of goes up to like at least, hold up, yeah, 55 minutes and 7 seconds. And so Horsey, I remember the first time I actually listened to it, I was actually eating food, and just like I put earbuds in, just was like, I was at like a bar or tavern or something like that, and I just plopped my wireless earbuds in. And I was like, all right, I need to listen to a new current 93 album. And I want to say this is around, I want to say this maybe was pre-COVID, I can't remember, or at least like it was just about to start. And I remember listening to it, and just like at the time I was like, I still was trying to get used to like differentiating like each album
Yeah.
during the neo folk era. But one thing I was able to notice, that like this sounds very aggressive, and it has more rock aesthetics
Yeah.
to like well, straight up just like guitars playing with
Yeah.
like overt distortion. But I'm like, dude, it sounds like a legitimate band right now. Like they have, and at the time I had never heard him use that many guitars in like his music. And I just remember just being like, damn, he sounds pissed off about something,
Yeah.
especially on Broken Birds Fly One, Maldoror Waits, so
Yeah.
hard to say. Um which I think actually is like the longest song on here. And this is the song, coming off of like when we're talking about Hitler's Kalki. This is another song that has that same type of vibe, like the
Yeah.
distorted guitar. It's like the consistency of like, just like that loop has
It's
you like in this like dark trance, and like
yeah.
he is sounding the most unhinged I have ever heard him. Even probably like at least as, or maybe even more unhinged off of like the Dog's Blood Rising era, because
I
I'm
agree.
like, it just felt like he was pissed off about
I
something during
agree.
this time period in his life.
It's the closest thing I think to psychedelia that they get. It's a proper raucous. It's a rock record in a sense. And I like what you said about it's the closest thing to feeling like a band, and I agree. A band playing, because I would put it next to, obviously they're completely different stylistically, but I Am the Last of All the Field That Fell from 2014 is probably the only other record in the discography that sounds like this in terms of, like I said, that leans more toward jazz, but
Yeah,
uh, it's the only other record I can think of where it really does sound like a bunch of guys in a room all playing together at the same time. Um, and it really, talking about some of his 70s influences earlier on, there's a progressive band from, oh gosh, where are they from? There's a progressive band called Comus from the
oh
early
yeah, I've heard of them.
1970s, and they're a really interesting band, and famously over the last, I can't remember what the tour would have been, but Michael Ackerfeld from Opeth, who is a big progressive rock fan, took them out on tour and got them back together. But their album First Utterance, I think they are English actually. Their album First Utterance was incredibly influential on people that came way later. It did nothing when it came out other than kind of it had a small kind of cult following. But people like David obviously picked up on that, and Michael Ackerfeld from Opeth certainly did. And you can really hear that in here. There's real demented kind of, like you say, pissed off and just totally unhinged, um, and there's a cover of Diana on here, which was Comus's kind of lone kind of hit song, if you like, if you could call it a
Oh,
hit.
so Diana's a cover
Um,
song?
yeah,
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
and it's very different to the original, but it definitely has that same spirit, that really kind of grinding, um, almost a sort of an anti-love song in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
If I was gonna
yeah,
say this album feels like a combination of like other current 93 albums, like all like just in one. Like I'm getting vibes of like Christ and the Pale Queen's Mighty and Sorrow on here.
yeah,
Maybe because of like the visceralness from like Dogon and the like how it just like, comes in very aggressively. And and also I'm pretty sure they used some guitar on Christ and the Pale Queens too, so that's probably why I'm making that connection. There's definitely other elements of like stuff like vaguely like more polished Swastika Smirnati song,
I
maybe
agree.
only the death of the corn, which is actually my favorite song on
I
this
was
album
I
because
was
like
just gonna Memphis, just gonna mention that Death of the Corn is probably the only track on this whole record that really feels like it's from the kind of the current 93 wheelhouse, you know?
yeah, like
Um,
it's honestly one of my favorite, like it's my new favorite in the sense that like because I do feel like when it comes to like the neo folk sound, there is like a traditional way of going about it. Like, you think of like the Death in June, like uh essence of like neo folk, which I feel like most people would say he's the starter of neo folk. Most people would say either David or Douglas like both kind of started it
yeah,
unintentionally. But when it comes to like that traditional neo folk sound, I feel like David has always been very unique with it. Like sometimes I have to remind myself, like, oh yeah, this is neo folk, but I feel like it's David's spin on it, or at least like he does it in a way because like he's doing poetry and he's in that weird type of sing-songy speech type of vibe, and I feel like this is actually him doing it in a more traditional setting. Like it's still poetic to a degree, but if it just like the guitar going like dun 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 dun, and then the harmonizing of like to the death of the corn, true love not his crown, something like that. And I'm just
it's
like,
interesting.
it's just
I agree with you. I think Douglas P and David are definitely the origin points for neo folk, I would argue. But where I think Douglas kind of embraced the fact that here's this new thing that I had a hand in creating. It's almost as if David, while he's kind of more than content to kind of create records like that, I've always felt he never wanted to be trapped by that.
yeah,
Um, so and you could pick 5 albums from this discography from different eras, and they all kind of, while there are themes, usually lyrically, there are themes that tie them all together. They are all very different, and they do kind of pull on different genres um, as they go. And I think, while I agree. I think David was as much a starting point for neo folk as Douglas P was. He perhaps wasn't quite as he didn't have as many reservations about being pure a purist about it, and so wasn't as restricted as what he could learn.
yeah. And that was something that I was able to notice, like, because since Current 93 was like where I started out with, and I started like slightly listening to like other neo folk outfits, like I could tell like there was like a cemented blueprint of how to make neo folk music.
Yeah,
And when I listened to all these other albums, like all these other artists, I'm just like, okay, so this is the standard of neo folk. But like when I listen to David, he's not sticking with that like that script all the time.
yeah,
He'll have it like in sparse places, maybe one or two songs is
yeah,
traditional neo folk, but for the most part, like I feel like I'm still getting like a cascade of like, you know, different forms of expression musically and
Definitely.
instrumentally throughout
Definitely.
like a neo folk project. Like even on Thunder Perfect Mind, which I would say is probably the most neo folk current 93 project out there.
Yeah.
There's still elements about it that still are like, experiment, like we're saying with Hitler is Kalki, it has that, traditional like rock, aesthetic to it. And I think that's like what I always have to like keep reminding myself, like, oh yeah, David technically what is a neo folk artist, and
Yeah.
he just comes back to it like every once in a while. And it's just interesting. It's just interesting because it's like these different channels of like how I'm like understanding like this band. There's the neo folk aspect, there's the mystical aspect, there's just the counterculture aspect of
Yeah.
them just experimenting just like with the human psyche and how one can make music. It's just current 93 just really there's nothing like them.
No.
Like
No.
put it plain and simple. Like I don't think you can't even try to replicate this type of stuff.
No.
Especially because I do feel like David is more personal about his things and his music. And so it's just like that's like there's always going to be a slight mystery, whereas like other bands, while they may have mystery, like you kind of get the gist of like what they're talking about. Whereas
Yeah.
like with David, it's like I'm always curious. Like even the more I understand, I get more curious of like, what does that mean? Or
Yeah.
is this like personal? Is this something that is out in the public to like research or so? Yeah, Horsey, while yeah, it's a technically short album, it's still almost like an hour long, and just
Yeah.
it feels like a nice like solid project of like all the most interesting or experimental aspects, kind of just put together from like other projects that they've done. And it's just a nice listen. But again, like I think why like I am attracted to it because it's something that was made during the neo folk era that kind of brings me back to the Dog's Blood Rising era, but they're kind of like perfectly merged together in a
Yeah.
certain sense.
Definitely. Definitely. And talking about personal the personal element, I suppose we should move on to the last two records that have come out, and
Yep.
kind of
The
bring.
light is leaving us all.
So we got The Light is Leaving Us All, from what year? 2018. And
Yep.
then he followed that up with last year's If a City is Set Upon a Hill. Now, these are two, we've talked about these a little bit before. And Trey and I were talking before we started recording this. And the thing that we picked up on was that the mood of, I would say actually the mood of both of these albums is of somebody coming to terms with their own mortality, more so than he has done before. He's always mused on dying and on death. But if The Light is Leaving Us All and If a City really feel like they stand alone in this, and they're the sound of somebody. I think you put it like this, Trey, before we started recording. Somebody watching watching their life play out all over again.
Yeah. Um, the thing about this album that's special for me, it, primarily because it's the first current 93 album I was ever able to listen to and anticipate because I knew because like
That's
they had
interesting.
released they had released the single for it, or like I think it was Bright Dead Star or The
Yeah, that's
Policeman is
right.
Dead.
Yeah,
And at the time I think I had only been listening, so this is 2018, so 15,
yeah,
16, 17, 18. I had only been listening to current 93 for about like 3+ years at this
right.
point in my life. So when I figured out that they were coming out with a new album, I felt like I finally got indoctrinated
Yep.
in like the fan, like, being a fan where I'm like, I can actually listen to a new project from them, and like it's coinciding with like my era of living.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, okay. And I remember listening to it and just being like, this is nice. And I even at the time I could tell that like it was like kind of a return back to form from like
Yeah, I
because at that
agree.
time they were weren't really doing too much neo folk that much anymore. Because I think the last project from after, like before this, was you had mentioned it. Hold up.
Probably Black Ships Ate the Sky, perhaps. Um,
No, the one in 2014. It was
oh,
oh yeah, I am the
I am the
last of
last
all the
field.
field that
Yeah,
fell.
I love
Yeah,
that
that
record.
that was the only thing that I think like that had came out, and then they didn't really release. Well, they released the Moons at Your Door and probably
Yeah,
some like Invocation of Almost, and like off skirt like
yeah,
little EPs and stuff like that. But outside of that, that was the first Current 93 album like probably in a while. And I just felt lucky that I'm like, oh, this band's been around for this long. They're still making music. I'm starting to love them much more at this point in my life. And I was just like, wow, I literally can say that like I was able to, anticipate a Current 93 project.
yeah.
And wait for like be like, all right, when's the release date? And it releases, and then I'll listen to it, and I like it. I think this is actually the most solid Current 93 project in the discography.
I
It's
agree. I agree. And I think it's the something that I picked up on listening to this again recently. It it really brings to bear something that is in a lot of David's work and a lot of Current 93 releases, but perhaps gets lost, is his sense of humor and the absurdist
yeah,
nature of a lot of what he does. There is a lot of nonsense poetry in here, in the kind of the English tradition of Lewis Carroll or Spike Milligan, people like that. And there's a lot of that in here. Messiah seeking donkeys and all of, kind of ridiculous, mad imagery that would be so easy to kind of make fun of if it wasn't for the fact that David's doing it with in such a knowing way. Um, and add that to the fact that the music is quite beautiful, very beautiful, in fact. Yeah, it's a great listen. And I think interesting that you say about the neo folk side of it, because again, in the way that we talked about the odd track on Horsey, kind of re-engaging there, you have something like 30 Red Houses on here, which is kind of less concerned with absurdity and kind of going back to um the kind of the mystic uh intonation that he's probably more known for.
yeah. I feel like this album pretty much is highlighting all the best, qualities of Current 93
I
throughout the
agree.
years,
Yeah.
and just combining them into like one solid traditional album. Because like there's not really any songs on here that are like past the 10-minute mark, like for
No.
usual Current 93 projects. Like even the longest song doesn't really overtly stays it's like welcome. I think it's maybe might be 8 minutes or 6 minutes, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But actually I think it may be the song that I was trying to compare to like Hitler as Kalki, and uh the other song off of a Horsey, where it has that same distorted guitar. Hold up, let me make sure. I think it's Your Future Cartoon. No, 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 no. Yeah, the postman is singing.
Yeah.
There's something about it that just gives me that similar like vibe as like those other two tracks, like with the
Yeah.
distorted guitar
It's
and
interesting.
like with that slight unhinged like industrialness to it.
Yeah.
And it's the only song on here that like sounds like that, but it still fits perfectly.
It is. And actually it's funny because with that track you feel like everything could kind of fall apart at any moment, and yet it never quite does. And then I think it's why for me, I feel these records do go hand in hand so beautifully. It's because on If a City is Set Upon a Hill from last year, there's none of that, and
None.
where you say, where you mentioned before that there's no record over the 10-minute mark on The Light Is Leaving Us All, and there's only one real instance of um the kind of uh trance like doomsayer big kind of
Yep.
big moments that there is none of that at all on If a City is Set Upon a Hill. And it's almost as if these records, like we were saying at the beginning, there's a lot of life flashing before your eyes moments with these two.
Yeah.
Um, and If a City is Set Upon a Hill feels like a real extension of that idea. Um, and yeah, I think it's an interesting time to be a current 93 fan because I think while David is certainly, I think, starting to look back upon life in a way he maybe hasn't before. I don't think he's done by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's more work to be done, and I'm really curious as to what he does next because If a City is Set Upon a Hill, as we said in episode 1, this is my favorite record. Now, I was like you in so far as when if The Light Is Leaving Us All, I think is one of his most solid releases. Like, and it's something that I would play to somebody who maybe wasn't familiar with current
Yeah.
93.
And
Um,
I've said that so many times throughout my current 93 videos. Like I would say maybe Thunder Perfect Mind. I feel like
yeah,
there's a good bulk of albums that like for people who are not used to this type of music, I have kind of readjusted my mindset where I'm like, maybe The Light Is Leaving Us All probably is the best. Cause like Thunder Perfect Mind, while like that still is a good place to start, especially if you really want to understand neo folk, you can go to that too. But I think when it comes to, people who don't really listen to songs that are very, very,
mm,
very long, like there's a lot of songs that are long on that album.
yeah,
I think The Light Is Leaving Us All probably is the best place to start for someone who is completely new to this band.
I
Because I remember
agree.
when I first listened to it when it came out, I'm like, like at the time I was like, yeah, this sounds. I wouldn't say it sounded more normal. It just sounds much more like there's it's organized. It's much more
It
organized
is.
properly.
And the irony with this is that there's no Michael Cashmore and no Stephen Stapleton on If a
Mm,
City, and their involvement has been less and less over recent records, which it kind of while they're still highly collaborative, there it feels like there's a sense with that David's almost getting his affairs in order in terms of, where he sees current 93 progressing in the future. There's a new set of collaborators here. Um, David Leal, his kind of organ work is Andrew Leal, sorry, his organ work is fantastic. On If a City is Set Upon a Hill is a beautiful song called Clouds at Tea Time, where it really kind of leans heavily on the Rhodes piano to kind of lead that track, which is a new thing for current 93 that we've not really heard before.
good
Um,
question. Are we still talking about The Light Is Leaving Us All, or did we go to If a City Is Set Upon a Hill?
I've kind of gone into If a City because I think they segue
Okay.
really well.
Okay,
Um,
sorry. Yeah, I was just making sure. I was like, because I was still like when I made that statement, I was still thinking about The Light Is Leaving Us All. But like, yeah, I do. There before we go to If a City, I did want to mention one thing. Well, one, A Thousand Witches is my favorite song off The
yes,
Light Is Leaving Us All.
mine. That's mine too.
And I don't know what. Again, melody. I'm a whore for melodies. I just love melodies,
Yeah,
bro. And
yeah.
this has the best melody on it, and definitely
It's
gives me that same vibe as like maybe a Layman to Susan to like
yeah,
a slight degree. Of
yeah,
course, like him talking about witches is like pretty consistent throughout his music, or maybe
yeah.
people he personally knows who are into that mystic like practices. And the last thing I wanted to mention about The Light Is Leaving Us All, because like I think this record is pretty straightforward, and I actually already did a review for this one too, so that's why I was going to keep it
Yes.
short. Um, this reminds me also of like the Inmost Light to a degree because of like the consistent
Yeah.
refrain of like you know on the Inmost Light, it's like the Inmost Light, where it's like this is the light is leaving us all,
No,
and it's
I get that. That's interesting actually. Yeah, I never thought about that before. Yeah.
Like I never knew if there was any like slight connections from like the Inmost Light series, specifically all the Pretty Little Horses. And in my head, because I'm just like, well, the inmost light, is in you, and then the light is leaving us all, it's leaving you. So I
Yeah,
feel like to this day, I don't know if there's any correlation or like him taking off of like those artistic expressions from all the Pretty Little Horses, but
yeah,
like that was the first thing that I thought about like when I had first heard the light is leaving us all.
that's interesting. But
But
yeah, I think, like I said, these two records go really well together. And The Light Is Leaving Us All is a much shorter and more succinct record, and then If a City Set Up on a Hill is even shorter still, and is
yeah,
one of, if not the shortest current 93 album. I'm interested to see whether he
yeah,
continues in this style, because, like we said, the kind of more raucous elements are gone from this album. It is very much a
completely.
person. It's very much the sound of somebody looking back on their life. And as we were saying before we started recording, the the lyrics seem to come from a place of almost looking back at childhood, um, in a nostalgic way, um, and yeah, a kind of acceptance of what comes next.
And I remember before, like I was describing this as like this album because I listened to this album last night, and read through all the lyrics, and I was describing it as something like what people see, like like as you're dying, your
Yeah.
life flashing before your eyes. Because I'll be honest, like I still was not able to like fully resonate with what was being said. Like the instrumentations are pretty consistent in sound, so like there's not really much to speak about when it comes. It's
Mm,
still beautiful. It's just like this really feels different than anything he's done
I
before.
agree.
And the fact that like it's so consistent, it's not really shocking at all. Barely. If
No.
anything, the only thing that's shocking about it is just like how confusing like the lyrics are. It's like they're very nonsensical, like you were
Yeah.
saying. But this, if anything, even more, because everything feels like a snapshot of certain parts of his life, and he just like kind of just wrote them down.
Yeah, I
Because I
agree.
literally was trying so hard to like make any connection from like one statement to the other, and it's like I couldn't. It's just there. Everything he's saying just sounds like a surrealistic painting.
I agree. And actually, something I wrote down, I mentioned the song Clouds at Tea Time earlier on, which is probably my favorite track on this. Andrew Leal's Rhodes piano on there kind of leads the track. There are hints of percussion here and there, glockenspiels and so on, but it's the oboe and the violin together. So it's uh, Aloma Ruiz Boeda, who I mentioned before, and then I think Ossian Brown is the person to play the oboe on here. Um, the way they harmonize together, it speaks so clearly to the sort of faded and distorted view of childhood that you have as an adult. And I can relate to that now. I'm 33 and I can relate to that now. So to be looking back the way David is here, almost like you imagined your own childhood, which is what this feels like at times. Like he's grabbing at these images that he's got in his head, and it's almost as if he's not even sure whether they're real or not. And that's how it feels. I mean, like I said, I can relate to it now at 33. There are some things I think back to my childhood, and I even wonder whether they happened or not, or whether it's the persistence of memory that kind of distorts them and almost brings them to life.
Yeah, like anytime like I'm like when I was listening to this, like of course, like probably my favorite song is like If a City, well, yeah, just If a City,
Yeah,
the beginning, just like how it just like comes in like with those instruments, like just very somber. The piano comes in and
yes,
just like if I literally feel like I can vividly imagine someone who's on their deathbed,
yeah,
having like these recollections, these memories, and just like pondering on like if like my existence like meant anything. Like
Yeah,
it feels very cold,
I
like
agree.
not in a bad way, but like I mean, obviously it's gonna like feel, just kind of somber in the fact that I was like, oh yeah, like this dude is approaching his end. And I'm not talking about like David specifically, but just like a representation of like, old man like in his bed,
Yeah,
just kind of just he's half dead pretty much, but just it's just in the all he can do is just think. And that's like what I get when I listen to this album. It feels very isolated, but like a type of
yeah.
isolation where it's just like, you really can't escape it because like your body can't continue to go on anymore. All you can do is really just like reflect on like what did you do in this life.
It's interesting because I think that comes from Rainier van Hout, who is a really respected Dutch classical pianist and has done some modern classical, contemporary classical pieces that are very much in that vein, very cold feeling. Um, and actually, another track I wanted to highlight as a favorite of mine is There Is No Zodiac, for the way his piano and the violin kind of weave in and out of each other. Again, in a way that we've not really heard in that way with Current 93 before. Um, but yeah, it feels, we talked before about, and I suppose really this is kind of maybe a nice way to end this and wrap it up, because we talked about Current 93's records feeling like they're altering consciousness. This record, it's very enveloping, and it can carry you with it. It feels very grounded at the same time, and I think that's largely down to, like you say, David making these observations from the point of view of somebody approaching the end of their life. Not necessarily him, but it's on his mind in a way that it maybe hasn't been before.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I definitely want to listen to this record a little bit more, but I feel like because it's so just outside the usual when it
Yeah,
comes to a Current 93 project, like, there's something that's not overtly connecting with me, obviously, because like, I do feel like I'm still in the prime of my life. Like
yeah,
maybe in the later years I'll understand
sure.
it. Well, I won't understand what he's personally saying, but like the vibe of it is just like,
Yeah,
hmm, that was it was like heavy, but like in a way that you usually don't feel like from a Current 93
I
project. It's just
yeah,
like
I
I
agree.
just I just feel just like just bewildered, I guess.
I agree. Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. But yeah, I think that's a really nice place to end. Because bewilderment is a big part of being a Current 93 listener, I feel sometimes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I wouldn't have it any other way. I think there's always something new to discover with this music, and I think that will carry on through to our next topic of conversation, which will be coil. Um, so yeah, anybody watching this, you know, put your comments in on these records and what you thought of our discussion today. We're going to try and keep this regular, like we have been doing, and yeah. Thank you everybody for watching once again. And thank you, Trey, for
Thank you
having me back.
guys. No problem. Thank you for doing this with me as usual.
Pleasure.
These are fun, and I as I said, I guess we can this is the third installment, and I think we can put this to a close.
Yeah,
Me and Jonathan will definitely do more Current 93 maybe in the future, but I think we've gotten a good grasp of like most of their albums at this point, and we can
I
probably put
think
it
so.
to rest for a little bit
I
and
think so.
venture into like you said, coil is like again like this is probably the most in depth I've ever gotten with Current 93 on this channel, and I'm just happy that I'm able to like give this to like my earlier subscribers after not really doing Current 93 videos or just videos in
Yeah,
general on this YouTube channel for a while, and I'm glad that like now that we have a good bulk of Current 93 content on not just this channel but YouTube that people can like go to.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people in the comment sections have been very appreciative of us doing this,
Yeah.
and we're really happy too, because like I do feel like, you know, I don't expect this band to ever be popular or like well known, but like at least for the people who like these bands and artists, you know, I want to have like more, you know, analysis on them or content, because like that was the
Definitely.
one thing I always realized, there's not that much on them on the internet like that, at least on YouTube, and like a in a setting where it's just like you feel like you can get a good, you know, chunk of substance out of like
Yeah.
talking about them.
Definitely.
Okay,
Cool.
and with that, we are going to close out. Guys, have a nice day, everybody.
See you later, everybody.